Welcome everyone to the Peace and Regeneration of the World, the role of the Mashriqu'l-Adhkar with Joe Carter. And this is part of our Big Ideas series, Baha'i Perspectives on the Issues of Our Time, where we address some of humanity's shared challenges and opportunities as we work toward advance an emerging global civilization, remembering Baha'u'llah's exhortation to be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in and its exigencies and requirements. As many of you know, in April 2023, the Universal House of Justice announced that planning had begun for the National Baha'i House of Worship for Canada. This exciting news encouraged us to plan a presentation on Baha'i temples for Big Ideas. And what better person to do this than Ottawa-born Joe Carter? Joe, along with Nushfar Asfan, wrote The Baha'i House of Worship, Design, Construction, and Community, published in 2022 by George Ronald. Joe studied architecture at McGill University. During a break from architectural studies to look for answers, he found in Canada's Arctic the Baha'i Faith, which he joined in 1970. After graduation, Joe lived in St. John's, Newfoundland from 1974 to 1986, and then in China from 1985 to 2016. There, he taught architectural design at the Tianjin University School of Architecture until late 1988, when he moved to Beijing. There, he designed the new campus for the Central Academy of Drama. In 1989, he married He Hong Yu, an architect-artist from Beijing. They raised two sons and founded a craft and fashion company called Five Colors Earth. Joe's book, Some Thoughts on China and the New World, was published in 2009. Since 2016, Joe and his family have been living in Montreal.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks to everybody who's attending. I hope you'll enjoy this. As an architect, I'm tempted to want to share with you images of design and construction of temples, which I have done, and which is the main content of the book that Nushfar Afnan and I wrote. But tonight I'm not going to do that because I'm finding that I want to focus more on the ideas behind the creation of the houses of worship that are being built. Why are the Baha'is doing that? Why is it important? I mostly want to focus on that this evening. So I'm going to put up a PowerPoint, and just a heads up, the PowerPoint has maybe 40 slides, and the first 10 or so are mostly text, which mostly I'm going to read and comment on. So the hard work is at the front, but the dessert is some nice pictures be out on the other side of that. So that's the front cover of the book that Nushfar and I wrote. It was hatched in China, inspired by a friend who said, China needs a temple. You should write a book about it. And it has not yet been translated into Chinese, but we're working on that. But tonight I want to, well, I forgot, I wanted to really thank very much the Big Ideas organization for inviting me. And it's a wonderful platform for people who are studying, researching some ideas and wanting to share them. I feel like I'm not a professor, I'm not an academic, but I've encountered the house of worship through design, through architecture, and I'm forced to understand it as we all are. So I'm on a learning curve like all of us are. Most of us are accustomed to seeing a Baha'i house of worship, a temple. But in fact, the house of worship is the core, the central piece of a larger development that is emerging now. And the name of the total institution, with its house of worship at the center and what are called dependencies that surround it, is called the Mashriqu'l-Adhkar, which is Arabic for the dawning place of the praise of God. This is a very special institution designed by Baha'u'llah, one of a few institutions that are uh, present in the Baha'i faith. Um, on the left is a diagram. It's not a rigid plan, but a diagram with the house of worship in the middle. And you can see surrounding it are facilities for humanitarian, educational, cultural activity, and including administration and community gatherings and so on. And on the right is the an architect's a site plan of what has actually been built now in Battambang, Cambodia. Of all places in the world, it's really quite interesting that the most advanced development realization of this institution in the world is in a rural part of Cambodia, not far from the Thailand border. So you can see in the middle is the house of worship, and surrounding it, they're starting to build these what are we're called referred to as dependencies. But the most distinctive feature then of this institution is that it combines worship and service. And that really is the core of what I want to talk about this evening. And these are the 10 or so slides where I have to do a bit of reading. This is a Shoghi Effendi said, the Baha'i worship, however exalted in its conception, however passionate in fervor, cannot afford lasting satisfaction and benefit to the worshipper himself, much less to humanity in general, unless and until translated and transfused into that dynamic, disinterested service to the cause of humanity. So worship on its own does not suffice. It has to be translated into action. And why do the Baha'is believe there's an indispensable connection between worship and service? And why do they believe that this connection is integral, is essential to the achievement of the oneness of humankind? Those are the two questions that I want to work on. Asking the question, why is the world dark, becomes more and more relevant. And over 100 years ago in Montreal, at the home of the Maxwells, Abdu'l-Baha visited for a few days. And in one of his talks, he said, "Today, the world of humanity is walking in darkness because it is out of touch with the world of God. That is why we do not see the signs of God in the hearts of men. The power of the Holy Spirit has no influence. When a divine spiritual illumination becomes manifest in the world of humanity, when divine instruction and guidance appear, then enlightenment follows, a new spirit is realized within, a new power descends, and a new life is given. It is like the birth from the animal kingdom into the kingdom of man." So the house of worship with devotional activity that's to translate into the service activities of the dependencies derives its energy from those who believe they are in touch with the world of God, who have experienced some kind of illumination and rebirth and have the motivation to pursue this. In order to understand the importance of worship and service as a theme in the Baha'i writings, I want to read a prayer. I'm going to pray. It's 2 slides, not very long, less than 2 minutes. And there are many, many examples I could have chosen. I was very interested to discover, preparing for this talk, that the theme of worship and service emerges everywhere you look. Once you're aware of it, you start to see it everywhere. And this prayer, in addition to talking about worship and service, puts them in a kind of an order and a framework, which I want to talk about. So first, I'm going to pray just briefly. O Lord, my God, and my haven in my distress, my shield and my shelter in my woes, my asylum and refuge in time of need, and in my loneliness, my companion, in my anguish, my solace, and in my solitude, a loving friend, the remover of the pangs of my sorrows and the pardoner of my sins. Wholly unto thee do I turn, fervently imploring thee with all my heart, my mind and my tongue, to shield me from all that runs counter to thy will in this the cycle of thy divine unity, and to cleanse me of all defilement that will hinder me from seeking, stainless and unsullied, the shade of the tree of thy grace. Gladden the bosom wherein the fire of thy love doth smolder, and set it aglow with the flame of thy celestial love and spirit. Illumine my face with the radiance of the orb of thy bounty, and graciously aid me in ministering at thy holy threshold. Make my heart overflow with love for thy creatures, and grant that I may become the sign of thy mercy, the token of thy grace, the promoter of concord amongst thy loved ones, devoted unto thee, uttering thy commemoration, and forgetful of self, but ever mindful of what is thine. O God, my God, stay not from me the gentle gales of thy pardon and grace, and deprive me not of the well springs of thine aid and favor. Neath the shade of thy protecting wings let me nestle, and cast upon me the glance of thine all-protecting eye. Loose my tongue to laud thy name. Thou art in all truth the gracious, the glorified, the mighty, the omnipotent. So with this prayer, I want to point out a kind of a narrative. I think the prayer is a portrayal of spiritual reality, and it gives us a story, a narrative of individual and social transformation. I'd like to illustrate how that is so. And in the 6 points on this slide, I'm taking elements of the prayer that I just read and elements from several other prayers, because they nearly all fit the same template. So first, I share my anxiety, my distress. I'm in this condition of being asleep, thirsty, of longing. And then I turn towards God as a friend. I immerse myself in the revealed word, in the scripture, in knowledge of God revealed by his messengers. And the goal is the sanctuary of God's guidance and grace. Then an enlightenment begins with a smoldering, like it's not quite a live flame. It's something hot that gets illumined and lit. The heart is ablaze and aglow with the flame of celestial love and spirit. I think for many of us, this is a real experience. We experience this when we pray. We experience it for the first, we probably never forget the first time we had this experience. And this is the beginning of an intimate communion with God. We feel inspired, thrilled, excited by the guidance, by the vision, the beauty of it. And then in this prayer, these points were covered, and it pivots, it shifts, and it talks about action. It says, graciously aid me in ministering at thy holy threshold. Ministering is an action. It invites us to observe guidance. The prayer says, make my heart overflow with love for thy creatures, and grant that I may become the promoter of concord amongst thy loved ones. So to become a promoter of concord, to become a protagonist of peace, to become a community builder is the what I'm praying for, what I'm asking for, that I would be able to do that. And then finally, the prayer closes with like, if I am in this realm of this kind of orientation to God, to life, please sustain me. Immersion in revealed knowledge is very important in order to understand worship and service, I think. Baha'u'llah says, O servants, ye are even as saplings in a garden, which are near to perishing for want of water. Wherefore revive your souls with the heavenly water that is raining down from the clouds of divine bounty. Approach the revelation, immerse yourself in the revelation. It's nourishment for your souls. It revives you. The word is the master key for the whole world. Word meaning scripture or revealed knowledge, inasmuch as through its potency the doors of the hearts of men, which in reality are the doors of heaven, are unlocked. So your heart and mine have portals, have doors in them that look onto heaven. How are they opened? The word is the key, the master key that opens those doors, and gaze upon heaven. So I think I know in some circumstances, to some audiences, if I say these things, people think I'm out of my mind, but uh, this is more real than real. It's an experience, and it's life-changing, and it's, as Abdu'l-Baha said in Montreal, the world is dark because we are not gazing on the heaven through the portals of our heart. Um, every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God is endowed with such potency as can instill new life into every human frame, can gladden and uplift the heart and reinforce the penetrating power of the word, transmuting earthly inclinations into heavenly attributes and inspiring selfless service to humankind. So in this quote, there it is again, a reference to worship, an aspect of worship and an aspect of service. So this word has this power to transmute, help us with the transformation of our earthly inclinations into heavenly attributes, and inspire selfless service. So these themes, they're relentless in the Baha'i writings. The link between worship and service. Suffer me not, O my Lord, to be deprived of the knowledge of thee in thy days, and divest me not of the robe of thy guidance. Give me to drink of the river that is life indeed, that mine eyes may be opened, and my face be illumined, and my heart be assured, and my soul be enlightened, and my steps made firm. It's powerful if we have a way to be, that our eyes are open, our face is illumined, our heart is assured, our soul is enlightened, and our steps are firm, confident. This comes through our relationship with the Word. Communion with God is possible. This is something extremely important in the understanding of worship. There is such a thing as communion with God. Prayer is the essential spiritual conversation of the soul with its maker, direct and without intermediation. On the wings of prayer, does the soul soar in the heavens of God and draw closer to the divine reality. So prayer is a spiritual food that sustains the life of the spirit. It is the fire that burns away the veils and a light that leads to the ocean of reunion with the Almighty. And the prayer finally, as I mentioned, pivoted from worship to service. Grant that I may become a promoter of concord. These themes are said in different ways in different prayers, but still following the same pattern. So in yellow, I put what I thought related to worship, and in green, I put what I thought relates to service. And it's interesting that service comes after. In order to be a promoter of concord, we need to have been through the worship activity. So I have a definition of worship. In the above sequence of ideas, there's a path that begins with worship, turning to and communing with God, that enables spiritual enlightenment and empowerment, and this arc arrives at service. Worship is associated with inner transformation. Worship is associated with inner transformation, and service is associated with its outward manifestation. Baha'is believe, an emerging divine civilization. There's an indispensable connection between them. Why are worship and service vital to the regeneration of the world? Worship awakens the life and energies of the soul and sustains vital motivation to be a better person through efforts to better the world. Satisfaction and benefits accrue when worship is translated and transfused into dynamic and disinterested service to the cause of humanity. So the themes that we saw in that diagram of the Mashriqu'l-Adhkar, the temple, the devotional space in the middle, and these places for service on the periphery, are a literal translation of these principles of worship and service. So the central operating principle and purpose of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of humanity. That is the operating principle and goal of the Baha'i faith. I put the principle of worship above this line. The line represents the progress of humanity and its goal ultimately of the oneness of humanity. This activity is, Shoghi Effendi says, is regulated by the twin principles, the worship of God and service to one's fellow men. So worship and service are regulating the twin directing principles that they seem a bit like guardrails, or they're a bit like the engine of our individual and collective life. And Shoghi Effendi says the connection between them, this indispensable connection between worship and service, is integral to the achievement of the oneness of humankind. In the above exploration of worship and service, we found working for the betterment of the world was inspired and motivated by worship. Worship begins with our capacity to link heaven and earth, to hearken to the revealed word, and to commune with God, so that we can translate divine guidance into the fabric of our lives and the society around us. As those enlightened by a new revelation increased in number and began to impact the society around them, social transformation began. New civilizations were born. Baha'u'llah portrays the phenomenon of civilization as a continuous process impelled by progressively revealed knowledge. The planet Earth is like a school. Divine educators such as Krishna, Zoroaster, Abraham, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad have impelled, respectively, Hindu civilization, Persian civilization, Jewish civilization, Buddhist civilization, Christian and Islamic civilization. We accept the juxtaposition of various faiths and the civilizations they impelled. There is a cause and effect relationship. There are also signs of civilization whose spiritual origins have been lost in the mists of time. Baha'u'llah says the purpose underlying the revelation of every heavenly book, nay, of every divinely revealed verse, is to endue all men with righteousness and understanding, so that peace and tranquility may be firmly established amongst them. We're back to the principles of worship and service. The transformational power of worship includes immersion in revelation. This creates righteousness and understanding so that these qualities may be pressed into service to establish peace and tranquility. The words "so that" tell us there is a process, namely outer transformation relies on inner transformation. The infusions of the word, with a capital W, at different points in history has not only impelled various civilizations, but are part of one process that has released ever greater amounts of human capacity. One place we can see this is in our social evolution. Humanity has evolved from the family to the village to the city and the nation. Having advanced to the scale of the nation, we are now challenged to create social order at the planetary level. From this perspective, we can view the time we live in as a turbulent transition to global consciousness and a global society. Baha'u'llah said the well-being of mankind, its peace and security, are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. The Baha'is see the writings of the Baha'i faith as a new revelation from God, a new infusion of the Word, with the guidance to establish world unity, to align our energies with God's plan for the spiritual empowerment of the human race, to make ourselves into world citizens, protagonists of our own development, to make us as one family on one planet. Abdu'l-Baha said in every dispensation, the light of divine guidance has been focused upon one central theme. In this wondrous revelation, this glorious century, the foundation of the faith of God and the distinguished feature of his law is the consciousness of the oneness of mankind. Baha'is see the time we live in as the end of the prophetic cycle and the beginning of humanity's maturity, an era that has been variously called the Promised Day, the era of the Great Unity. This is how they refer to it in China, and the kingdom of God on earth. Baha'u'llah said, "The most great peace shall come. Let not a man glory in this, that he loves his country. Let him rather glory in this, that he loves his kind." The transformation of heart we need to translate these ideals into action is derived through the above described process of worship. As in times gone by, our transformed soul develops its awakened capacity through the transformation of the society around us. What's new today is that we have become so interconnected. The society around us is now the whole human race. There's no more us and them. I'd like to shift focus a little and look at the impact of worship and service on cities and architecture. The centrality of a connection with God in every civilization has been demonstrated by its sacred architecture, because every society translated its spiritual understandings into the social norms and behavior, the culture of their society. They may not have been literal dependencies, but they were still translated into the life and the culture this of the society. This is just a few examples of um, let's say a history of houses of worship. This is an indigenous uh, healing circle. This is these are kind of like just neighborhood temples in a Dong minority village in China. I've been there, and I've been here as well. This is in Myanmar. It's what is left of an ancient city. All the wooden houses burned down, and all that's left are the brick sacred architecture. Some are temples, some are depositories of relics, and so on. This is Prague. The skyline is dominated by sacred architecture, as is Cairo with its mosques, as is every village in Quebec, which brilliantly places the church in a wonderful spot. This is a cloister. You know, you can see there's a house of worship here, a church, and associated with it are, you could say, dependencies. And here's a plan of one, and there's a list. I know it's small for you to read, but I'll mention a few. So here's the church in the middle, and surrounding it are all these dependencies, these humanitarian educational facilities. They include doctor's quarters, medicinal herb garden, school with lodging for teachers, guest house, and so on. These are like precedents for the Baha'i model. And here's an example from Islam. This is in Istanbul. And surrounding this mosque, these buildings on the periphery of this mosque are madrasas, are schools, they're educational, and they're medical facilities and so on. So it's another precedent for the Baha'i version of a place for devotion surrounded by places of service. Um, uh, so now I'd like to ask the question, what would a community look like that is learning how to apply the principles of worship and service? So the diagram on the right, I have devotional gatherings in the middle, and that is that's the that's the fire where everybody warms their hands. That's the well from which everyone draws their nourishment. That's that communion with God happens either individually or collectively and nourishes all the activities that are going on in the community. And in a Baha'i community, there's very few Baha'i communities that actually have built a house of worship or let alone dependencies. Um, but so the Baha'i community, this is a diagram that shows what it looks like. There are study circles to study the writings and their application to society, to the life of the community. There's youth activities, junior youth activities, children's classes, and all of those activities have a service component. They're all oriented to both learning and learning empirically, doing some kind of service. Uh, Among the activities are also when the community gets strong enough, it can participate in discourse activity, exchange of ideas with either for anything from informal discussions with neighbors to um, forums at the United Nations. And also the community, when it grows, gets strong enough, can take on social action, which starts out very simply at first, but can get more and more complex, even to the construction of buildings and schools and so on. Um, so um this process, number one point on the left, a burgeoning devotional spirit in a locality among a few Baha'is who don't have a temple, don't have dependencies, but this devotional spirit finds expression in prayer gatherings that foster social harmony. It's a good start. And as well as in educational programs dedicated to building capacity for service. We can't suddenly do everything. We have to develop and build our capacity, our strengths. So that's what a lot of Baha'is are doing. That's what the communities are doing. They also, you'll find in the Baha'i community, emphasis on study of the revelation of revealed knowledge, of constant study, and the daily use of it in our individual lives are vital to inner personal transformation, study of the word, so we can go through this personal inner transformation and as much as possible engage in the service. So these are some photographs that show some of these activities. They're devotional activities. These are devotional activities all around the world. These are there's an activity, there's a monthly meeting called the Feast, which is gathering for consultation, reflection, sharing. Um, this is social action. Some like on the upper left, there's a tree planting activity. So they can start off very, very simply, but it's a process of developing the habit and of connecting worship and service. And here is participation in the discourses of society, everything from the Baha'i faith has a NGO status at the UN. There's many, many kinds of forums that are set up I would say big ideas is one of those. There has to be a learning process. We're not suddenly able to serve. There's a very interesting thing about the learning process in the Baha'i faith because our virtues, our strengths are latent. The Baha'i faith says they are like gems. They're like mines that need to be unearthed. They can only be developed through education. Think of some virtues such as caring, loving, patience, courtesy, generosity, and so on. None of those are possible unless I engage with other people. I have to be in a community to be able to develop my capacity. All of these virtues are social. So it means that in order to develop myself, my capacities, I have to interact with others. So the educational strategy in the Baha'i community is that um, we don't go off and hibernate somewhere and become perfect and then serve others. We develop our inner selves through efforts to improve outer development. We build capacity through community building. So these are reciprocal twin goals, and it's a dynamic, ongoing learning process that allows for error and mistakes and course adjustments. So, what would a community look like that is learning how to apply the principles of worship and service? This empirical learning process is scientific in its method and it's systematic. Treat the community as a workshop, experiments in the application of the Baha'i revelation, and share the results globally. Shoghi Effendi said the faith is scientific in its method. So I made a diagram with the scientific method is the bold green. It says scientific method at the top, step 1, 2, 3, 4. The first step of the scientific method is make observations, then form a hypothesis, make a prediction, and then 3, test the prediction. Number 4, iterate, use the results to make a new hypothesis. You may have to adjust it. The same thing happens with Baha'i consultation. Gather the facts, share, report, discuss, make a decision, act in unity, and then adjust the original line of action. There's a correspondence there. And then there's a cyclical pattern of development the Baha'is have adopted of study, consult, action, reflection. It also has that same spirit of generating knowledge, searching for the right way, and doing it in unity and systematically, and sharing the results globally. So another very important institution that Baha'u'llah has created for us is a system of global governance. Its headquarters is in Haifa, and many countries in the world have national spiritual assemblies, they're called, and many local spiritual assemblies. So this is a way of channeling, organizing, inspiring, and sharing. In 2012, the Universal House of Justice shared a message in which they said that the correlation of worship and service is especially pronounced in those clusters around the world where Baha'i communities have significantly grown in size and vitality, and where engagement in social action is apparent. So some communities had become large enough, active enough, and mature enough that it was time to actually build some physical structures. And the primary sign of readiness to build a house of worship was the pronounced correlation between worship and service. I opened this talk with an image of the site plan of the what was being built in Battambang. So this diagram is being actually translated into physical buildings. In 13 sites were chosen in 2012. And Shoghi Effendi said about the institution of the Mashriqu'l-Adhkar, of all the institutions of the Baha'i faith, this one can most adequately provide the essentials of Baha'i worship and service, both so vital to the regeneration of the world. Therein lies the secret of the loftiness, of the potency, of the unique position of the Majul-Azkar as one of the outstanding institutions conceived by Baha'u'llah. In the last part of my talk, I'd like to look at the development of the Baha'i house of worship in three stages of growth. This idea was introduced by the Canadian writer Anne Boyles and Nushfar Afnan, and I used it to structure the book we wrote about the Baha'i houses of worship. These stages are early growth, and then circling the globe with the construction of continental houses of worship. And the third stage is called community building, the construction of the Majul-Azkar at national and local levels. In this map, you can see the first two temples. The bright gold star signifies the first house of worship built in the world in Ashgabat. And over in North America at Chicago, we have the second house of worship built in the United States. In 1919, the construction of the house of worship in Ashgabat was completed, and the design for the Chicago house of worship was approved. In the late 1800s, the persecution of the Baha'is in Iran pushed some of them to move to Ashgabat in Turkmenistan, just north of Iran. They had already learned much about community building from Abdu'l-Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah. They arrived at their new home ready to build a Baha'i community. They started to construct the world's first Baha'i house of worship in 1902. They had already owned the land for 9 years, and during that time, they built two schools on the site, one for boys and one for girls. Schools for children, especially girls, were unusual at this time in this part of the world. On the right is a photograph of the girls' school taken in front of the house of worship, and on the left is the site plan. The big white circle in the middle is the temple. The four white squares at the corners are the dependencies, two of which are schools. And there's the temple is surrounded with 9 pools of water. The picture on the left is of Haji Mirza Muhammad Taqi Afnan, a relative of the Bab. He was the project manager, chief financier, and builder of this temple. And on the right, we can see a picture of what they built. It has been influenced by the Taj Mahal in India. I'd like to read a part of a statement by the House of Justice about the community in Ashgabat, speaking about their legacy. It says, in the city of Ashgabat, a devoted band of believers who settled from Persia and who for a time found peace and tranquility in Turkestan bent their energies towards the creation of a pattern of life that would reflect the exalted spiritual and social principles enshrined in the revelation of Baha'u'llah. In a span of a few decades, this group, originally consisting of a handful of families, was joined there by others and grew to a few thousand believers. This community, fortified by ties of camaraderie and animated by a unity of purpose and a spirit of faithfulness, was enabled to reach a high degree of cohesiveness and development, for which it gained renown throughout the Baha'i world. These friends, guided by their understanding of the divine teachings and within the bounds of the religious freedom they were accorded, toiled to create the conditions that would lead to the founding of a Majul-Azkar, that crowning institution in every Baha'i community. While the forces of irreligion eventually swept through the region and thwarted hopes, the brief appearance of a Majul-Azkar in Ashgabat is an enduring testament to the volition and effort of a body of believers who established a rich pattern of life, deriving its impetus from the power of the creative word. I think it was around 1938 that the Baha'i community was disbanded by the USSR, by Stalin. Some members of the community went to gulags. The building was no longer used the way it was. It was badly disturbed by an earthquake, although it did not collapse, thanks to the very strong foundations they had made for it. But eventually it was torn down with lack of maintenance. Here's the second of the two um, temples built as part of stage one in Chicago. Uh, Among those who heard about the activity in Ashgabat were the enthusiastic new Baha'is in America, especially in Chicago. They wanted to build a temple as well. They didn't think about whether it was local or national. They just wanted to build a temple. An outstanding leader emerged to carry out this enterprise, a woman called Corinne True. She began looking for a piece of land, and with Abdu'l-Baha's encouragement, it was bought. Abdu'l-Baha put her in charge of the project, at least in its early stages, which was a test for some of the men in the Baha'i community. The Baha'is in North America at that time were a very young community. It was not yet a mature, organized group, such as the one that built the temple in Ashgabat. So Abdu'l-Baha made the Chicago temple a project that not only yielded a temple, but was a channel that led to the development of the capacity of the North American believers. Through acts of service, their capacities were developed. And he made it not just a local or national temple. It was referred to as the Mother Temple of the West, of North America, and invited international contribution. And this endeavor was the embryo from which the Baha'i administrative system was developed. Construction started in 1922 and didn't finish until 1953. Corinne True was a key person in that process, and she was there when Abdu'l-Baha laid the cornerstone in 1912, and she lived to attend the official opening of the temple, its inauguration in 1953. Another key important person in this project was its architect, uh, who was from Quebec, Canada. His name was Louis Bourgeois. He had been working on churches in Quebec as a young man, and he went to the Beaux-Arts in Paris, as people did in those days, to study architecture. He then disappeared for many years, apparently wandering a lot through the Middle East. He became inspired by the idea of a round temple with a dome and was designing it years before there was invitations for submissions, proposals to build this temple, and his was chosen in 1919. It was designated as the Mother Temple of the West of North America, and it became the first step in a grand vision to announce the arrival of this new faith. The plan was to build a total of 8 continental temples. So we enter stage 2. Shoghi Effendi, the grandson of Abdu'l-Baha, undertook this work. He became the leader of the faith, the guardian of the faith, when Abdu'l-Baha died in 1921. Before Shoghi Effendi died in 1957, he oversaw the completion of the Chicago Temple. He oversaw the design and inaugurated the construction of the next 3 temples, which were in Kampala, Sydney, and Frankfurt. He also designated locations for the remaining 4 temples and encouraged the purchase of sites. So here's the concept: is each of these continental temples would have a zone of influence. It would represent a region of the earth. And they're in Chicago, Kampala, Sydney, Frankfurt, Panama, Western Samoa, New Delhi, India, and in Santiago, Chile. The last one was completed and opened in 2016. Here's a few images of those buildings. You can see Kampala, Sydney, and Frankfurt, in Panama and Apia, Western Samoa, Delhi, and Santiago. You can also see the design was evolving, responding to modern conditions and materials. The construction of the houses of worship illustrates an interesting characteristic of of a Baha'i approach. Baha'u'llah said, "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established." The growth of the Baha'i faith follows this principle. Instead of first establishing large local or national communities, the limited resources of the faith in the first half of the 1900s were channeled to globally oriented endeavors such as the Continental Houses of Worship. And another extremely essential project was the creation of a system of global governance. Shoghi Effendi guided the construction of the administrative order designed by Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha. Its crowning institution, the Universal House of Justice, was elected in 1963 by members of the 56 national Baha'i assemblies. With a system of global organization in place, beginning in the 1990s, the Baha'is turned their attention to community building at national and local levels, especially at the local level, and pursued more temple building. The advantages of this approach have been felt as efforts by Baha'is in local areas to address the needs of our age can now draw on and share experience with Baha'is and do this easily all over the world. In 2012, the House of Justice said that in 2 nations and 5 locations, the correlation of worship and service is especially pronounced. The communities have significantly grown in size and vitality, and engagement and social action is apparent. Here's where worship and service reappear, the coherence between them as the criteria for the establishment of national and local houses of worship. It's also interesting to see what parts of the world they are in. And in 2023-24, the number of sites ready, the number of places ready to build national and local temples, Mashriqu'l-Adhkar, increased, and one of those is Canada. Here's some images of the temples some of these are completed and some not. There's the design for Papua New Guinea. The entrances are derived from vernacular architecture. There's the energetic design from Africa and the Congo. There's Battambang, Cambodia, Tanah Vanuatu, and from India, from Colombia, and from Africa. So we can see in all of these designs a strong reflection of local culture, and especially the ones at the local level had a lot of local participation in what was built. The large outreaching canopies of the Columbia House of Worship, for example, were inspired by a comment made by one of the participants at a meeting with the architect who invited brainstorming, invited ideas. And somebody said, well, we need shade. It's hot here. We need protection. So that's partly where that came from. I'd like to end my presentation with this quotation, a kind of a summary and invitational idea. In a mode characterized by a willingness to learn, the Baha'is strive to contribute to a process of community building in which acts of worship and efforts to promote the common good are woven together. Everyone willing to participate in this process is welcome. Its purpose, after all, is to help raise the capacity of more and more people to take charge of their spiritual, social, and intellectual development, so that they come to see themselves as active agents of both their own and their community's progress, rather than passive spectators of events beyond their control. Thank you. From a design point of view, again, it's the what architects are comfortable with the word pattern. The a building with 9 sides is the pattern that is used. Even the dome is not a requirement. It's just open on all sides. The number 9 signifies perfection, and um, and it's incredible how you could see from those images I shared how diverse the interpretations can be. There's infinite room there for this to be a pattern to be used by any culture, any people, anywhere on the planet, and express their their culture, their values, their interests. You commented on the Chicago temple, and I think it's that temple was designed by Louis Bourgeois of Acadian origin and born in Quebec. And he, as a young man, was designing churches, and he had a spiritual longing. He in those days, back in the early 1900s, people went to France to study architecture. You couldn't do it in Canada. And he wandered the world. He disappeared for over 10 or 15 years, and he apparently went to quite a few Muslim countries, and almost obsessed with the vision of this temple. And he made a model of it, and before it was even to be a building somewhere. His goal was unity, in his sense, a unity between East and West. So the temple has Islamic elements and Christian elements, which from the world he explored, those were the elements of East and West. And I think he succeeded in combining those things together. If you think of the challenge, how do you make something Islamic and something Christian in the same building? It's in our book. If you read the book, you'll see it's all explained there. Um, but there's lots of room to express local culture. But I think it's interesting that Louis Bourgeois, over 150 years ago, was interested in an international and a global aesthetic. I can remember in the 80s, it's when the House of Justice asked the Baha'is to start thinking about the idea of community service, so service by their community. And I was living in St. John's, Newfoundland at the time, and our idea of service was to plant a small garden in a public space in a suburb of Mount Pearl. That's what we did. And it was a doable project. I think the Baha'i institutions encourage us to do something, start small, doable, achievable, and gather strength as you go. Expand your capacity as you expand your experience. So we did something very small, very simple, but it was very visible, and people enjoyed it. We got a lot of positive feedback for doing that. So I think that's it almost sounds a bit cliche. The kids go out and pick up garbage in the park or something, but
Mhm.
it's okay. It has to start simple and small. And an important thing is that there is organization behind it, that there's consultation behind it, that there's enjoyment behind it, there's friendships developed as we are serving together. So it's the baby steps that we all go through that they're extremely valuable, important, but we start small. I don't have any personal experience of that. I know it's happening in some of those temples that were built after 2012 that are now completed and functioning. They have daily prayers, dawn prayers, and they have a lot of activity. It's interesting. A lot of them have activity related to nature and agriculture, like the one in Colombia, for example. Um, they even before the temple was started, as soon as they bought the land, they started to bring in from all over Colombia native plants. They had this project of bringing back native indigenous plants because a lot of these countries, the agriculture is taken over by monoculture. So they did that in Colombia in the temple there. That a very interesting ecological um, garden, forestry related activities with a lot of involvement by the youth. So it's a very, very interesting and valuable practical outcome associated directly associated with their house of worship. There's other examples like that. The house of worship in India has generated a lot of activities for youth and junior youth and children in its environs. It's the house of worship in Colombia has a very strong. They have a hall underneath the temple that's used for public meetings, public activity, and they have a very strong outreach program, a lot of social activity, a lot of discussion, discourse meetings, and so on. At the moment, most cities do not integrate, coordinate their social infrastructure. Like, say, there's a school board. The schools are all over the city and try to relate to neighborhoods. The hospitals are all over the city and relate to maybe they're more regional or different. Like all of these institutions are not concentrated. Usually they're not. They're just kind of somewhat randomly occurring and have separate administrations who sometimes have little contact with each other. But in the Baha'i proposal, I think it has really interesting implications for the future of cities
Mm.
because you can imagine the pattern of a house of worship in the middle and dependencies around it. You could have a very large one that was sort of city scale, a big hospital, big universities, research centers. You could have a neighborhood one that would have a little clinic, a kindergarten, a seniors center, and a temple, a smaller temple in the middle that's you could walk to, that's nearby. So in fractal fashion, you could have these centers that they integrate all the social services in one place. So that it means that the potential for interaction and mutual support are vastly increased, I think. If anybody knows the work of Christopher Alexander, he wrote a book called The Pattern Language, and he was a strong advocate of making nodes in cities whenever it was possible. And these nodes would become vitalizing community centers and have these different institutions juxtaposed. And Patrick Geddes, who's considered the father of urban planning, he was Abdu'l-Baha's host when Abdu'l-Baha visited Glasgow in Scotland. And he was a very adamant proponent of the juxtaposition of cultural, educational, and religious institutions in one place, so they could have some synergies. And one last thing I'd like to say is there's a beautiful example of a kindergarten in Japan that was next door to a seniors center. And I forget which one of them their land was expropriated or bought or something. And the two institutions decided to move in together. So you had in one facility a kindergarten and a seniors home. And there's most incredible photographs I saw where you would have an art class for the children was to go upstairs to visit bedridden grandma and draw her portrait. So it was a beautiful integration of kindergarten and seniors. When they're doing exercises, the kindergarten children, their speed moving around was somewhat similar to the elderly. They did it together. The elders were downstairs with the children telling stories. So the directors of the school found that the young children were acquiring capacity for empathy, caring, is an amazing, strong evidence of the potential synergies of the juxtaposition of these institutions. When I explained the Mashriqu'l-Adhkar, the house, the house of worship and dependencies around it to somebody, she said to me, "What? You mean now God's an urban planner? What are you talking about?" There's something to that, eventually, like those pictures I was showing of Cairo, of Prague, and so on. The skylines of cities were defined by their sacred architecture. And that's the future the Baha'is are imagining.